Hello, everyone, and welcome. We want to thank you for joining us for the Advancing Digital Skills in Rural America Lessons from the Field. My name is Shaniqua Corley Moore, and I lead our tech workforce efforts at the Center on Rural Innovation. And before we dive in, I wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session so that you and others in our rural communities that we serve can watch at a later time. You will see both the chat feature along with the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom. Please use the Q&A box to share your questions for the speakers throughout the panel, as we will not have time to answer, and we want to make sure that we get those compiled and answered for you after the webinar. Feel free to use the chat feature right now to go ahead and introduce yourself. Um, if you have any technical issues with audio or video, you can go ahead and share that in the chat as well, and our team will do our best to help you get reconnected. Today, you will hear what we have learned from our work. We will share some key findings from our evaluation, walk you through the project model, and then spend some time with some local leaders from the communities that we went through this process with, and they will talk about what it looks like on the ground. Oh, all right. For those of you who may be new to the Center on Rural Innovation, we are a national nonprofit that focuses on advancing tech economies in rural America, and that rural people should have the same access and opportunities as those in metro areas. We use data-driven research along with our partnerships and programming and investment to support and connect our rural learners as they build inclusive tech economies to create opportunities for rural people so that they can thrive where they live, work, and play. The conversation today focuses on a pilot project funded by the Ascendium Education Philanthropy Group. Now I am going to turn it over to Brittany to provide you with a brief overview of Ascendium.
Thanks so much, Shaniqua. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Cord, and I am a senior program officer with Ascendium Education Group. At Ascendium, everything we do is really grounded in improving outcomes for learners from low-income backgrounds, with a specific focus on groups that have been historically underserved, including rural learners. When we talk about rural learners specifically, we're not just talking about geography, we're talking about institutional capacity, community context, and access. A core principle of our rural strategy is that learners shouldn't have to leave their communities to access high quality education or career pathways. And our investments are really designed to meet learners where they are. Ascendium funds work across the full life cycle of projects and grants, from early exploratory ideas to proven approaches that are ready to scale. Our role as a funder isn't just to support programs, but also to strengthen the conditions that make those programs possible. Things like institutional capacity, partnerships, data infrastructure, and policy alignment. In our early rural grant making, we focused on trying to better understand rural learners and identifying post-secondary and workforce pathways that actually lead to persistence, completion, and good jobs. One of the biggest things that we have learned is that rural institutions are doing a lot with very limited resources, and that there are relatively few national intermediaries with deep rural expertise. And rural institutions often face those compounding challenges. So, difficulty in attracting specialized talent, limited local policy or resources, and fewer wraparound supports that we all know: childcare, housing, transportation. And so, as we look ahead, our strategy has really shifted toward strengthening our trusted partners, being realistic about the institutional capacity, and designing investments that institutions can actually absorb and sustain. And that means fewer one-size-fits-all solutions and more critical attention to implementation. And really why CORI stood out to us is because they are doing all of these things and doing them very, very well. They are directly addressing the challenges that we've seen in rural communities, particularly around assessing access to high quality career pathways in digital and tech adjacent fields. First, CORI really expands access for rural learners by addressing those real barriers that I've just mentioned: distance, infrastructure, limited employer capacity, that often prevent participation in traditional workforce models. Second, CORI is really advancing the earn while you learn models that align with local labor markets, allowing learners to build skills and credentials without leaving their communities. And third, CORI plays a strong intermediary role, supporting small employers, convening partners, and helping to translate employer demand into pathways that rural institutions can actually deliver. And finally, we really see CORI as a learning investment, not only for us, but for the field as a whole. Not just a programmatic one, really thinking about how they can help the field to better understand what it takes to design and sustain high quality career pathways in rural contexts. From an Ascendium perspective, this investment really wasn't about a single model. It was really about investing in CORI and really thinking about how to contribute to the broader understanding of what works in a rural context. We're especially interested in what CORI can teach the field about implementation, partnerships, and capacity building, and excited to hear more about their learnings from the rest of the panelists. I will pass it back to you, Shaniqua.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So, I think I'm too fast. Cam, can you help me go back? I'm not. Oh, thank you. So, over the past 3 years, we've partnered with six rural communities across the country to help them build and strengthen their tech workforce pipelines. That included standing up and improving their digital skills programs, supporting learners as they moved into either internships, apprenticeships, or jobs, and helping their communities use the data to understand their local tech demand. So, what drove this pilot and why it matters? In short, it is equity for rural places. Throughout the Great Recession, it exuberated a growing opportunity gap between urban and rural economies. This has been driven by automation, globalization, and the decline of entrepreneurship. And at this moment in time, we are still facing a rural opportunity gap in the tech realm. We are seeing that 96% of the new tech jobs are predominantly centered in a small number of metro areas like Silicon Valley, Boston, and Seattle. And even though 11.3% of the current American workforce lives in rural areas, these rural areas only account for 4.1% of tech workers. So, through our labor market data analysis, we found that 30% of rural tech workers are employed in these non-tech industries. And we are seeing that there is an overtly abundantly missing of 80,000 missing tech jobs in these rural areas. In short, means that if rural employers staff tech roles at the national average for the industry, then rural tech employment would be at least 30% higher than what it is today. So, two core problems identified based on our previous research within rural communities was one problem being the lack of awareness of tech careers, and the other being the inability to address the unique needs of rural learners. So, rural communities often face unique challenges when it comes to accessing technology and tech careers. Through the pilot, our solution to the problem was to partner with community leaders and stakeholders of each community to create a tech workforce pipeline that caters to the needs of rural workers and ensure significant access to the tech skilling programs. We worked with, as I mentioned earlier, the six communities as shown on the screen, starting with Cochise County, Arizona, who you will hear from later, Taos, New Mexico, Ada, Oklahoma, Selma, Alabama, Chambers County, Alabama, and Wilson, North Carolina, which you will also hear from later on today. And these two leaders will be speaking about all of the things that they have learned and the things that worked well and didn't work well over the past 3 years. And now I would like to pass it over to Amanda, our Director of Research at the Center on Rural Innovation, and she will discuss the data behind this pilot.
Thanks, Shaniqua. I got to do the program evaluation for this program, and I worked with my research and data team on this, and that includes, there we go, Adam Dewberry on my team, who's an anthropologist. And so we looked at some of the data associated with this program, and we also did interviews with the community to see what the outcomes of this program were. So if you look at the resources section with this webinar, you can actually find the report there. I'm just going to cover a few of the highlights that I found particularly interesting, but the full report is available to you in case there's other details that you might find interesting. This is my main takeaway I have from the report is that the rural tech workforce efforts, they work when employers lead and systems are coordinated. But what's needed next is sustained ecosystem investment. So that's kind of our big takeaway from this program evaluation. When we're looking at this program evaluation, what we wanted to do is make sure we're evaluating what the project actually did. So it was important to look at what the project goal was, to build coordinated employer-informed tech talent ecosystems in rural communities, especially for women, people of color, and low-income learners. And as Shaniqua mentioned, the way that we did this was by selecting 6 diverse Rural Innovation Network members, assessing local employer demand. This is through surveys, also through employer roundtables, and connecting employers, educators, and workforce partners, which we also had education training program partners, roundtables, and we also did a survey of them to support and launch employer-driven tech training programs, and finally to document a scalable and replicable model. So here's another look at the 6 communities that we worked with for this program. You can see on the right is the national share of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in rural America at about 25%. And you can see for each community has a higher share than the national average. So we're looking at some pretty diverse communities here that we were working with for this program. So I wanted to touch on what the employers told us and what the training partners told us. So we have a picture here of Wilson, North Carolina, and some of the roundtables that the CORI team did. On the right, I wanted to show some survey results of what employers told us about what technical skills or jobs that they're currently outsourcing that they would consider hiring locally if they could find qualified talent. Shaniqua told you about those 80,000 missing tech jobs in rural America. This gets more specific at what those missing tech jobs are. What exactly are those tech jobs that rural employers want to hire locally, and need the technical skills and the local talent for and would hire locally? So if you look at the top there, you can see the top one that employers said was web development. And as you go down that list, you can see next you have IT support, technical project management, programming. This is to maintain and operate equipment, digital marketing, database administration, and you can kind of go down the whole list there. So one thing that employers noted was that they wanted credentials, portfolios, and apprenticeships, not just degrees. So really this kind of experiential learning and the experiences that workers can bring to the workforce, that shows that they have the skills in web development, in IT support, and in technical project management. Another thing that they told us at these roundtables was that soft skills matter as much or more than technical skills. All of these technical skills are very important, but what goes well with it are these kind of soft skills. These includes things like reliability, communication, professionalism, a lot of soft skills that a lot of training partners work to instill in their learners, but also might be missed. So when we asked employers about what community engagement activities that they were interested in participating with, this is what those employers said. So they wanted to participate in tech career days in the community. They were willing to participate as a guest speaker in a classroom, speaking at community events, providing site visits or tours of their facilities, and even student mentorship. A lot of employers want to be engaged with training partners, with the community, to get a better connected workforce program. But what they need is more structure, clarity, and trusted intermediaries. So now when we look at what training providers told us, so this is through roundtables with training providers, and what I'm going to show you are the survey results. So when you look at what technical programs or curriculum training partners currently offer learners, you can see the top one is digital literacy. And then from there, we have coding, digital marketing, IT support, cybersecurity, web development, and I'll let you look down the list there. Again, so the full list is also in the report if you want to go back to this list as well. So when you look at the top skill there, digital literacy, we see that one is the highest across a lot of different programs. And when you look at the research on this, we know that about 92% of jobs now require digital skills. So that really makes sense that digital literacy is at the top. We know that tech skills are demanded almost across the board from jobs right now. So what we did find when we start to look at what training providers are offering and what employers are asking for, there is some significant misalignment in spots between the offerings and what employers need. So just to give you some examples, when we compare the survey from employers with the surveys from those training partners, we can see that employers put web development as the top, where it's a little bit down the list for our training partners. Looking at the next one, we have IT support was number 2, a little bit lower on the list there for our training partners. You can see that about 40% of our employers surveyed said that they would hire IT support if they could find those skills. When you look at the training partners, about 26% said that they have that technical program or curriculum that they're currently offering. So one large misalignment here was technical project management. Just being able to manage a technical project. We saw that that was 3rd on the list, so very high on the list for employers, but pretty far down the list for our training partners. So when we look at what training providers told us, not just about the skills and curriculums, they recognize the importance of those soft skills that employers mentioned was so important. You can see the top of the list when they talk about job readiness are those soft skills. Working on communication and professionalism and problem solving was top on that list. But they also recognize that job readiness gaps really undermine success. And they mentioned things like career exposure just happens too late in a learner's kind of timeline there, often at high school or later, suggesting that career exposure would really help if it was earlier in the kind of learning career of those learners. So when we look at those training providers, they also said that they also want deeper employer partnerships. All of those things that you saw employers say they want to engage with, educators would also love employers to engage with them on those things. From internships, apprenticeships, student mentorships, to employer site visits, they want to do all of that. Why isn't it happening? What we found is a lack of time, structure, capacity. One thing we see is that capacity constraints in rural areas, not just with training partners and employers, but across the board, are an issue. So the headline results of this evaluation report, and again, the report is available on the resources. I encourage you to dive down a little deeper. Headline results are that the CORI team worked with 6 diverse rural communities that they successfully onboarded. They worked with over 90 plus employers, educators, and workforce partners. Over 150 rural learners enrolled in tech or digital skills training with wraparound support, 34 employers planning or launching internships, and new tools created like new job boards, readiness programs, and dashboards. And now I'd like to kick it over to Mike, who can provide a little bit more kind of color to what it looked like for the CORI team on the ground as they worked with this program.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. And thank you for teeing that up, Amanda. I just want to acknowledge some of the folks in the chat of describing your rural communities as being unique. And I think that's one of the main things that really excited us about this pilot is if all the 6 communities that we work with were super unique and diverse in terms of how far wide they were stretching, how many people, the types of people that were in there. And we have a saying at CORI, once you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. And so we're hoping that our teachings today of what we learned from the different 6 diverse communities is going to resonate with you all. So let's talk about what we saw on the ground. This is working with employers, educators, and all the different stakeholders that make up these tech talent ecosystems in the community. So first, what we found really worked was this employer first sequencing. So of course, if we want to get people jobs, we have to talk to employers to figure out what jobs are in demand, what skills are in demand, what they're seeing in the talent marketplace, so that we can then understand what skills they need, how we can engage with educators. But there's an other side to that too, which is as we're doing this work, it's super important to engage employers through that learning process, through that learning pipeline. For example, how are employers showing up as mentors? How are employers showing up to inform curriculum that our education communities are helping to design? How are employers showing up for work-based learning opportunities? Again, starting with them really helped to set the tone for how we're going to do this work. And then being a neutral convener, we were told by all the communities this was really helpful. Number one, we're not involved in local politics, so we're removed from that dynamic. But number two, because we are a national network, we get to share stories of what is working and what isn't across rural communities around the US. So being able to share all the different stages of what this work looks like, being able to share some of the pitfalls that other communities have been able to avoid or what they've had to go through, and also success stories of what has worked was really impactful for us as a neutral convener. We also found that work-based learning, super important to this process. You know, I discussed originally engaging employers in this. How do we know what real world projects exist if we don't hear from the employers? How will learners get access to that work if we don't engage employers early? So what we were able to do is by getting educators in the same room as employers, we're actually able to get those folks to connect and talk about what skills and what projects should be embedded into the classroom to be able to get that experience at an earlier interventions for learners and the emerging talent. Now, because we did this work with 6 communities all at the same time, those 6 communities got to convene together and share their stories as they're going through this journey together. That was a really important piece to this, as people got to share what was working, what wasn't. They got, who here in their network has somebody they can, ask for a gut check of what's real and what isn't, and base things in reality. And that peer learning was super crucial to helping these folks engage in that experience and engage in that journey together and learn from each other. So let's talk about what didn't work. I think these things on this list are probably common regardless of where you are, what geography you're in. But I want to go through a couple like key highlights here. Certainly engagement fatigue. When we are doing this work as a neutral convener, there are lots of meetings that are required for us to be able to inventory all of the details of both the educating landscape, the employer landscape, the learner landscape. So engagement fatigue does arise. But there's also issues of there might be competing initiatives within each community that overlap with the work that you're doing. So having a really understanding information of where lane you're going in and bringing in the stakeholders also part of that lane is going to help reduce some of these overlaps of meeting fatigue. There's certainly, something Brittany had mentioned earlier on is there's severe local capacity constraints. Sometimes there's only one or two people in the communities we're working with who are running quarterback for connecting employers to educators, or connecting people with skills to employers, or connecting people with skills to learning opportunities to help them upskill. And so those folks might be the keepers of those relationships to connect that ecosystem. So I ask people in the audience, what does your database look like of all the people within the ecosystem who is making this work? Do you have access to that database? And is that shared? Because if that person moves on, how are you going to continue this work forward? And what we also saw is, especially, in relation to that, there's leadership turnover that happens just for the natural course of when people change careers. And so sometimes those relationships are taken with them. Again, creating a redundancy and a succession plan for how the people who are maintaining these ecosystems is really going to be important. And another thing, 3 years is just not enough time to see long-term systems change. But what we did learn is how to accelerate that process. And for those of you who are listening or saying, ooh, this is something I'm interested in, those can be details on how to reach out to us to get more information at the end of this. And so some of the implications, what can practitioners do now? So for those in the audience who are doing this work, what we encourage folks to do is to formalize those employer and education partnerships, creating feedback loops, especially right now where technology and the skills job demand is changing so fast, it feels like it's almost impossible to keep up. Having those feedback loops on an ongoing basis, we recommend, quarterly basis of those check-ins of what are the new emerging skills, what are the new emerging tools, how do those exist in all the different career pathways that exist locally. That feedback loop is really going to help you stay in touch with what employers are looking for and if curriculum is helping to fill that employer demand. I will share another piece. When there wasn't a specific connection between where employers were looking for skills and the local education systems that were able to provide those, if there was a missing piece there, we did leverage national upskilling partnerships like Google and Cisco and some others to help fill that gap while the local communities were able to build their curriculum to make sure that they aligned. So that national skilling partnership is something that we were really able to do as a national convener. Another piece is introducing tech career exposure early. Absolutely something that practitioners can do now. And again, that's crucial when we're engaging with employers to bring them into this conversation early. If I'm to ask the audience right now, how many of you knew that your current job was a job when you were in middle school? I knew that I didn't know. I imagine many of you might be in that same boat. So how do we pull back the curtain and add transparency to the jobs that currently exist, whether it be digital, tech, or tech adjacent? And speaking of that, focusing on tech and tech adjacent roles embedded in existing industries is something that's really crucial, because an employer might not consider themselves a tech employer, but they might have tech jobs. When we brought employers into the room with us and we asked them how many people are outsourcing some sort of tech role, many of them raised their hands. Whether it be website development, IT, cybersecurity, you name it, many of them were outsourcing. And when we asked them if you were able to find talent locally, would you insource? Most of them said yes. And so those are hidden jobs. So I encourage folks to have conversations with your local employers, figure out what type of jobs they're outsourcing, try to source talent to maybe fill that gap. Again, that's extra potential contract work that your local talent can take advantage of, keeping it all that economic benefit in your community. And if you're a funder out there, what should you support? I think one of the critical things here is that this is long-term flexible work. So having long-term flexible funding to match that is going to be really important. And as I mentioned, employer engagement is ongoing as people rotate through whether role as an employer, the role as a convener. That's ongoing work as these ecosystems tend to evolve. I think having a neutral convener is really important, and also having an organization that's really embedded in the community doing this work, that partnership really helps to accelerate this work together. Um, Supporting job readiness and wraparound supports, another key piece. Again, we want to be able to remove the barriers of people being able to upskill, being able to get jobs. And those wraparound supports are things like having access to childcare, transportation, access to technology, and those things we found to be really crucial. And then, as anybody has going through, learning a new skill or moving into a new industry, imposter syndrome is real. And being able to do this with other people who are doing it with you just helps to yield more successful outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about our approach. I went over this a little bit, so I'll move fairly quickly. It was about inventorying the employer and job training landscape and looking at employer demand, and then connecting those two and filling gaps with some national providers. Those two didn't connect, while employers and educators were able to create that curriculum feedback loop, and then attaching wraparound supports to this. So as local talent's moving through the pipeline, they're going to be supported. They're going to be learning skills that are in demand from employers, and employers are embedded in that learning journey. And then being able to align all those things together helps to build that cross-sector community awareness, because you've got all those moving parts who are now in the same room, on the same page, moving in the same direction. And this helps to create a sustainable and replicable model, which we learned from this pilot. And let's talk about some of the patterns. Like, what were some of the trends that we saw? Here's the key one. For those of you who are designing workforce development programs, I'm going to ask you, are the learners at the table when you're designing those programs? Because we did find underrepresentation from the learners who we were designing programs for at the table. And when we did bring them in, if we ask young people what they want, or emerging workforce what they want, they will absolutely tell you. So if you're an employer out there, if you're working with employers and say, are your job descriptions attracting young talent? They might have outdated job descriptions that they need to be refreshed. Well, I'll tell you what, the young emerging talent will help you to figure out what's going to be attractive for them to be able to join that employer. Also, experience beats credentials at entry level. So employers are looking for people who are hungry to learn, willing to show up, and want to get their sleeves rolled up and actually get into the work, rather than somebody with a credential or degree. There's also need for ongoing coordination. There needs to be that regular collaboration, as we talked about. I recognize that there can be meeting fatigue, but getting really focused on what your goals are, we found to be a critical piece to this. And then also, because there are so many opportunities for potentially upskilling programs, or the number of digital and tech jobs might be displaced throughout the community, do you have a single door of entry where people are going in so you can direct them to the right places for upskilling programs, for digital or tech job opportunities? So some of our communities are creating that centralized place so that everybody can point to that same doorway and they're all speaking from the same page. And then, there's a lack of infrastructure and access, which creates barriers. We certainly saw that amongst other communities as well. And then what were some of the recommendations across our communities? So launching a jobs and learning hub. Again, we talked about this. What is that centralized place where all the digital and tech jobs exist, where all the digital and tech upskilling programs exist, and those wraparound supports? Is that all in one place? Some of our communities are starting to do that work right now. It does take some investment to be able to do that, but that is certainly one of our recommendations and what our communities are working towards. And then developing those paid work-based learning opportunities. Again, hands down, this is going to be one of the more important things. If people want to get into the digital or tech space, they need to be able to play with the tools, and they need guidance and mentorship to do that. And they shouldn't have to give up their day job to be able to do that. If we can get employers to pay for these opportunities, then they are investing in the emerging talent, that hopefully investing in the attraction and retention of that talent in their business. And then establishing those curriculum advisory boards. Does your community have a digital or tech employer advisory board? How are your education systems being informed of the emerging skills in the marketplace? We encourage you all, we encourage our communities to be able to engage in that work and creating that feedback loop between employers and educators. And I think that's it for me. Enough of me talking. I know you want to hear from our communities. I'm going to pass it over to Cam to introduce our wonderful guests.
Thank you, Mike. As our presenters come to the screen, I just want to acknowledge that we really could not do this work without the community leaders that were a part of in each community and a part of this work for the past 3 years. So I'm happy to have Mignon Hollis from Cochise County, Arizona, as well as Emily Wells from Wilson, North Carolina here to share more about their on-the-ground experiences leading some of this work. So let's just start with some introductions. Emily, do you want to go first, sharing a little bit about you and maybe about the Wilson community as a whole?
Absolutely. Hi, I am Emily Wells. I work here with the City of Wilson for Greenlight Community Broadband, and Gig East is our community and engagement manager. So Wilson is about 45 minutes east of Raleigh in eastern North Carolina, between Raleigh and the beach. So small community that is growing, and we're very excited about that, with a deep history in agriculture and also innovation. So that's what we bring together, is this deep history of knowing our community and the lane we're on, while also pairing that with emerging technology and new ideas.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Mignon, you want to go ahead?
Hi, I'm Mignon Hollis, and I do economic development here in Cochise County. We're the Arizona Regional Economic Development Foundation. We serve a county that has the highest decrease in population over, I don't know, over the past 10 years. And I think at the height, we were close to 150, and now we're down to 123,000 across the county. One of the participants, Daryl, I saw in your message, you had said that you don't have a college or a hospital in your area. Many of our communities inside our county do not either, so can completely relate to that. So that's us. Oh, and we are on 2 borders. So the county has 2 borders into Mexico. We have 2 ports, which adds a little uniqueness to our dynamic also.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. So I want to start the conversation by really helping the audience to understand, what was your starting point when CORI came to you and say, hey, we have this funding to be able to do this work in your community? What was your first kind of like, okay, let's go in this direction? Mignon, do you want to start?
Sure. So when that first happened, I really had a long conversation both with Shaniqua and Mike just about what that looks like. We had tried to do some tech, create a tech hub earlier. And the biggest struggle that we had, quite frankly, was people didn't understand what tech meant. So we had to do like a whole campaign, because people were saying, oh, I don't want a tech job, because they thought that meant coding. So there was a lot of time spent initially, and that's why when we say 3 years isn't nearly enough, it took us a whole year practically just to define what tech was, and that everyone's job, regardless if they were an accountant, if they were an artist, if they worked in a car shop or repair shop, that there was a tech element to their job and to their work. And so that was probably the biggest struggle at first, is just wrapping our arms around the definition and getting the word out about what tech is and what tech is not.
Awesome. Emily, what about you guys? How did you start this project? What was your focus as you thought about what this project could do for your community?
I think our first step was starting with lists. So I'm a list maker. Most people on our team are list makers. So we just started making a list for several different categories. The first one was who we wanted in the room. So who was our wish list of people, because we're really fortunate in Wilson to have a lot of community support organizations that are doing great work. Which ones we felt like could add a lot of value to this conversation, and whose input that we needed to hear. So that was one list. Another list was talent gaps that we felt like we could already kind of sense from programs that we run. So because we are a municipal broadband service, we do a lot of work ourselves on trying to inform and educate people on how internet and broadband access can enhance their lives. So we already had a little bit of an idea of what was happening in our community, but we knew we needed a more holistic picture of where the talent gaps were. And we also wanted people in the room who could help give us a better idea of, like we've mentioned already, what skills are needed by employers that exist now, but also employers that we know are coming to our area in the next few years. So we had a lot of lists going on, and that kind of helped us mix and match, or compare and contrast rather, what we have and what we're doing well and what we might need to put more effort towards. So I think that was a good starting point, and then that kind of enabled us to launch into conversation with a focus.
Awesome. I love that. And one of the things I want to kind of go into our next question thinking about is both of you really talked about, helping people to understand what a tech career could look like, and maybe what upskilling that they needed to have. So, through CORI, you guys have and continue to have access to our tech training programs with partners like Cisco and Grow with Google, but then even leveraging some of your own local community training that you had, whether it was at a higher ed institution or maybe already embedded within your K-12. How did you guys think about leveraging those local and national partnerships to really fill that talent gap that you saw in your communities? And Emily, I'll let you start first.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most surprising discoveries through this whole 3-year process was once we got in the rooms and we were talking with our community support groups. We knew that there were a lot of resources that already existed in our community. I don't think what we fully realized to an extent was what Mike mentioned earlier, where we had competing initiatives going on. And so that was a real eye opener for us. Like, okay, we're doing these things, or we feel like these things are needed in our community, but several groups might already be doing it in a different way. If we can just help them amplify that, that saves our energy, that extends their reach. So that kind of reframed how we think about a lot of the work that we do, which was really helpful, and kind of led us to decide, okay, our role needs to be a connecting point. So out of those conversations, we actually formed what we're calling the Gig East Alliance, which we are building to be a central resource for resource builders, where it'll be listed who all of these resource providers are in our community for learners, what they offer, and that can be a one-stop shop for people who are seeking skills training rather than them running all over town or through different avenues to find what they need and maybe getting discouraged or expending their energy. So that was something that we were really excited to discover through this process. I would say when it comes to national resources, we have been really excited to leverage programs like Cisco, Microsoft, LinkedIn Learning, Grow with Google, because those tend to be more flexible than a lot of our local resources. Because here in Wilson, we like doing things face to face. We like being in person because it's relational, right? We've got relationships. We're building relationships with our learners. But some people have, their 9-to-5 job, or they want something that's just a little bit more flexible because maybe they don't have good childcare or transportation. And those national programs have been hybrid or virtual or self-set, where the learners get to set their own pace. And that's really helpful for people who aren't able to come in person but still want support. So I think those are really invaluable as well, and not to mention cost saving because they're not paying to get these certifications.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mignon, what about you guys?
Again, for us, there were a lot of resources, same as Emily, just kind of figuring out where those are. Um, there was a deeper issue, and that was that even if those resources were there, people didn't think they were for them. And so we spent a lot of time saying, no, this is designed for you. And when you work with underserved, underrepresented communities for so long, and somebody comes into town with something that says it's for them, they're very skeptical. Because it's like, okay, this is a one and done, and then we don't even have broadband later to continue using this, or I'm going to do this, but then who's going to take care of my kids? And so there's a whole attitude that happens when there's generational poverty. And so having to overcome with folks what that looks like and building that trust. And so when Mike talked about being a neutral conveyor, he did that. You all did that in such a way that people felt like, oh, this really is for us. And having those roundtables with more than just educators in a room, but having everyone in the room and then being able to say, oh, okay, maybe this is really for me. Maybe I do have a chance. And then one of the things that came out of this for us was we do have a hive here now that addresses that digital literacy. And again, it's very welcoming. Everyone can come in and see that it is for them. And so we started building that confidence in our community. So some communities are way ahead of that and they already are more sophisticated. And I always tell people, it's not that we're not as smart and not as scrappy. It's just that we don't have that sophistication. When you haven't had opportunities before in front of you that actually worked and didn't hinder you in some other way, you're skeptical about things that come in first and that are new. And so this was a chance for our community to be able to build trust around other entities that are in our community already. And so we have this community innovation center, and that was the whole thing. We wanted to become that trusted source. And by having the Ascendium grant and that work happen, it just solidified that for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you really touched on building that trust due to some of the systemic mindsets and
Yeah.
that you spoke about. I think that's something we see across all of our communities is really going in and being that neutral convener, as you said, and making sure people feel like this is for them. And, even though you are in education or employment or a community member, there is a place for you in this work, whether it be taking the training or leading the curriculum design or whatever that case may be. So love the points that you guys pointed
Yeah,
out.
I just want to add to that. The good
Yep.
part is we went throughout the whole county. So we had the team, they traveled, they know all of Southern Arizona. They went to all the little teeny towns that, just has one library and that's it, or it's just a mobile library. But going into those communities and spending the time and then not just coming in and doing that one thing, right? They stayed, they took tours. I mean, you can ask Shanika and Mike. I think, they're new supporters of Cochise County, but they spent time inside that community, not just for that one event. And that made a huge difference to the community members to be able to build that trust and say, yeah, okay, these folks really do care about us. It was a very, very important. And you have to do that before you can do anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of comments in the chat about libraries. And when we think about spaces where people feel comfortable, to be included and invited into this work, libraries can often be that space where people are already coming because they may have a childcare space or a teen
Mhm.
center or things like that. And just being in a space that engages people in that way and allows them to want to engage in that way is super important. So to all the people in the chat that are speaking about libraries, definitely keep that as a resource and a connection point as you think about starting some of this work.
Libraries are, but I just want to caution you that libraries, they're amazing, but they're overtaxed. We can't expect them to do everything. And so that's why we've pulled some of the stuff and worked with our libraries to say, hey, can we put this into the Hive? Can we put this into something else? Because yes, those libraries are those trusted sources, but with cuts that come down, now you've got two librarians or one or a half librarian that's supposed to do all that work. So
Yeah.
libraries are great. Let's be very kind to our librarians.
Absolutely. Do the ecosystem mapping and see
Yeah,
who else you
yeah.
can partner with, right? Awesome. So let's transition a little bit to talk more about that employer relationship. I know that this is something that, each community, it looked very different depending on what type of employers you had in the area. Did they consider themselves tech employers? So talk to us a little bit about what that engagement looked like to engage those employers, keep them engaged, and even what they came to you with as maybe barriers to why they weren't engaged in the first place. Emily or Mignon, I'm happy to start either way.
I can start if that's okay.
Of course.
This might sound like an oversimplification of it, but simply sending an invite was a good place to start for us because we found that we were naturally tending to be very learner focused or trainer focused just by the nature of what we do. So we weren't actually inviting a lot of employers to the conversation, um, and kind of thinking outside the box of what we invite employers to. I mean, even if it's just simply a networking event or a learning opportunity, if you invite people into the room in a way that is less defined, sometimes that leads to more natural conversations. So just creating a time and a place for people to meet and connect with each other, kind kind of makes those conversations a bit more natural. On the flip side of that, we've also tried creating really intentional opportunities for employers and for learners to interact with each other. So we've had success with more like quote unquote showcase events, whether that is pitch competitions or exhibit opportunities for learners to kind of show what they've learned in any projects that they put together during a program. Because on the flip side of that, sometimes they come with a purpose and they're very dialed in for who they're trying to meet and what they're trying to find. So I know that sounds like two conflicting answers, but I think there's some duality. Both can be true at the same time. Um, and then also inviting people outside of who our regular contacts are. So through this Ascendium project, we found people in roles in organizations we've been working with for years that we didn't know existed. And those people are in direct lines of communication with the employers. And we met them and we were like, oh my goodness, where have you been? We've been looking for you for a long time. So just I think breaking out of routine a little bit, this really helped us shape up our mindset and our forms of communication.
Yeah, and Emily, I maybe you could speak a little bit about the position that I believe your Chamber of Commerce hired on, which was the employer liaison. How has that changed the nature of that consistency in engaging employers for you all?
Yeah, so that individual, she works with our Economic Development Council. So that is her title is employer concierge. So she works directly with new organizations and employers that are moving into Wilson. She acclimates them to the community. She finds out what it is that they need, and then she can inform the business community or our education institutions what it is that they're looking for specifically. So she is like truly an invaluable liaison between the two because she is getting that information directly from the source. And so we were extremely excited to meet her and get to work with her and build that relationship.
Yeah, I remember her being a part of one of our roundtables and just having that central point of contact for employers. And she came in with like, here's the new employers coming in, here's the timeline, here's the roles that they're potentially hiring for. It was just really great to see that transition to kind of being that central source point for
Mhm.
that employer engagement and what that did for you all, being able to engage
Yeah,
with them. Mignon,
she's a
tell us
rock
a little bit
star.
about tell us a little bit about your employer engagement.
Pretty much the same as Emily had said. We did, you have your same old people. And then what we did to reach out to the ones that hadn't been reached out before, because I just knew there was a whole pocket of folks that, again, felt that they never had a seat at the table. We found other trusted sources. We found other nonprofits, mostly churches or community centers, your libraries again, food banks, Salvation Army. And we went and found lists there of people that hadn't been, and we made sure that they were invited. And because they were the trusted source, we asked that trusted source to send the invitation out, right? And so then it isn't somebody just cold calling because they would get invitations before but think it wasn't for them. So just using other nonprofits and people that traditionally aren't around the table. We did a lot of work with Premier Alliances, which they work with people with disabilities. So we made sure that they were at the table and that then they would invite the employers that their folks worked with and also their community.
That's awesome. And Mignon, I'm gonna stay with you because you mentioned something that leads into our next question, which is around those wraparound supports, particularly for, learners and community members who may be interested in starting their tech career, but don't have all the, may have barriers to get into that entry. What are some of those? You mentioned Salvation Army and
Mhm.
organizations like that. What was your relationship like with bringing those in? What were you trying to prioritize, based on the barriers you see within your community?
Yeah, we really, I mean, my big focus and driver is people that aren't at the table. So that was like the number one thing. If they haven't been here before, why haven't they been? Let's reach out. So there was a lot more legwork that had to happen in the beginning, but now those folks are coming back. Now they're regulars, but they'd never had the invitation or thought that this applied to them. And so even if you have a community college, people that know about a community college know about a community college. But what about all the folks that don't even know there's a community college or that community college is for them? And so we really spent a lot of time again working with those communities and those individuals to let them know, no, this is for all of you. And so then that's been really great. And I love seeing that action happen inside our innovation center.
That's awesome. Emily, what about you all? I know you guys have a really strong Dress for Success program in your community. Tell us about what that wraparound support looks like for people in your community.
Yes, we have Dress for Success. So, for those that aren't familiar, that organization provides like interview prep, um, clothing for interviews, a lot of that. I know people have mentioned soft skills a lot in the chat. They do a lot of training around soft skills as well. So, really preparing people to re-enter the workforce if they've been out for a while, or even if they're just trying to pivot, they provide support around that. Also here in Wilson, we have a micro transit service called Ride, which replaced our public bus system about 5 years ago. So it works kind of like similar to a rideshare service. But that's a really great asset that we have here in terms to providing transportation for those who might have trouble getting to and from. But we also are realizing not a lot of people know it or know how to use it. So we're trying to bring more awareness around that and other city services that enhance that quality of life. But then also we're seeing struggle with access to devices. So we love our public library because they do have devices there, but that is something that we're seeing some learners struggling with is they either don't have a device at all or they have a device that is really old and can't, perform a lot of the things that they need to. So we're always looking for opportunities to either provide devices for learners or bridge that gap. But yeah, those are a couple things.
Awesome. Well, we're going to end this conversation future thinking, forward thinking, and I would love to know how you guys are thinking about how AI might shift some of this work. So, whether that be your approach to tech skilling, hiring, or employer engagement, how are you thinking about how AI impacts the work you're doing in building these inclusive tech talent pipelines?
That's a
Danielle,
tough
you go first.
question. I mean, it's a tough question. And I will tell you, economic developers are hesitant to use AI because we want to say everything's so individualized and there's not one plan answer for anything. But it is such a helper. And so, again, we have our hive here who really introduces AI to folks. And so it's baby steps. It's baby steps and people being comfortable with AI because I think so many times you just hear about all the bad things that AI does and to be aware of what AI can do that would harm your family, harm your children. And so it's overcoming that and having those conversations about here's helpful tools. Here's helpful tools on, you don't have to start from scratch. AI can create that. So again, for us, it's back to just those baby steps and having the conversations about how can AI help your business, right? And having that instead of here's all the things you need to be careful of that AI can do to harm you. So it's a whole baby step conversation.
Yeah, Emily, what about you guys?
Yeah, I would say definitely the same for us. We've been focused on building just some comfortableness around using AI, taking away the trepidation of something that's really big and scary. And I think you mentioned earlier, Mignon, a lot of people that we work with don't feel like entrepreneurship or innovation or technology is for them when, it's for everyone. So really just trying to assure people that they can learn it, that it's not something that is scary teaching you about how to use it safely. Absolutely. But we're trying to emphasize that it's not only for people in certain fields, and the more that people can dip their toe in it and adopt it, that will better prepare them in the future for the workforce, if that's something they're trying to get into, or just other things in life. It's not something that has to be isolated. It can really help them across the board.
Awesome. Well, that is the end of our conversation, ladies. Really want to thank you all so much for not only the work you've done over the past 3 years, but the work that you continue to do in your communities. And we did this work in 6 communities. So if there's any other members who are part of this work and in the other communities we worked in as well, just want to acknowledge you all and thank you for your time, dedication, and commitment to this hard work. I am going to bring Shaniqua back just for some closing words, and then we will close out.
Awesome. So I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers and to Ascendium for making this work possible, and to each of you for spending your time with us today. The stories and the data that you heard are really about what's possible when it comes to rural communities, funders, and the partners when we all work together to build real pathways, especially in tech careers. Just in notes, we will be sharing the recording and slides and a link to the findings report so that you can dig a little bit deeper and bring ideas back to your own communities. If you would love to stay connected or are thinking about exploring partnerships with CORI, please reach out through ruralinnovation.us. On behalf of the Center on Rural Innovation and our community partners, thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.